Welcome to AP European History and AP Russian History with Dr. Brovkin. After a short break, I returned to our series of lectures on the Russian Revolution and Civil War, and this is at the very end. Today we're going to talk about the collapse of the white regime, which was the topic of a previous last video, and today our video is called What the Reds Do When They Win. In other words, I'll focus on the events from December 1919, the collapse of Denikin's army, and March 1920, which is when the last ships of the British and the French departed from Novorossiysk and Odessa, carrying with them a few refugees that could get by. Now, of course, in any civil war, when the winners win, they have a pretty tough policy to those that are defeated. But in this particular case, it was something special. It was not just vengeance. It was not just mass executions of those caught. It was vengeance on the entire classes of population that were not particularly friendly to the Bolsheviks. And that is especially concerned the Cossacks, which are really Russian peasants, and the educated classes, those that were called bourgeoisie, those that are well-to-do, that had no particular guilt or action as opposed to the officers, simply because they belonged to those people who didn't like the Bolsheviks and who lived on the territory controlled by the whites. Uh, the best thing I could do is read to you a passage from a report of a British pilot who flew over the area in December 1919 and described what he saw. This is a fantastically interesting evidence because that is an eyewitness who essentially published this report. You can find it in my book, Behind the Front Lines of the Civil War, on page 232 if you're interested on the sources. Here it goes. I shall never forget the moment. No, I'm sorry. As to the sentiment of the Cossacks with regard to the Soviets, about 100,000 of them fled from their homes when Red forces occupied the territory eastward of the Sea of Azov. This number is quite well verified, not only by the reconnaissance of the aviators who reported a stream of refugees 60 miles in length, women, children, cattle, pigs, and whatever could be taken along, fleeing southward in the middle of March 1920. From other sources, the fact undoubtedly existed. It is only definite fact, bearing on the attitudes of the population towards the Reds, and whether they were justified or not in doing so. Nevertheless, this number of peasant population and the Cossack territories believed themselves in such danger from the Reds that they abandoned everything they could carry along and fled their homes. So this is the end of the quotation. Obviously, these last couple of months of the Red advance and defeat of the Whites was quite hectic. Here's another description of the situation. The population's fears of the Reds were justified. Hundreds of officers caught in the city were executed, even those wounded and in the hospitals. Reports from the various cities all depict the same picture of the arrival of the Reds. It was a massacre of the officers, rape of the bourgeois women, robbery of the bourgeois neighborhoods, settling of accounts with those who collaborated with the whites. When Budionny, this is a Red Army commander, cavalry took Rostov, it was allowed to plunder bourgeois neighborhoods for 3 days. As in Odessa, the whites stayed in the city were massacred. Now, plunder the city means that they could kill and rape without any consequences. And bourgeois neighborhoods means those neighborhoods that were well off, where they could burst in somebody's house, kill a man, rape a woman, steal all the possessions. This is the Russian Civil War. This is probably worse than burning of Atlanta in America. Comparisons are hard, but this is as rough a handling of defeated population as it gets. Now, there's also a touching story of survival, which of one boy, which I cannot resist read to you, which is from a report of a British officer in the a ship called SS Rio Negro uh, in Odessa, and this is what he wrote, and this is, of course, again, an eyewitness testimony. I shall never forget the moment we shoved off the wharf in Odessa. All the morning, the firing in the town continued to increase, particularly machine gun fire, and it was obvious that soon the harbor would be untenable. At 11 a.m., we were ordered by naval authorities to leave the harbor as quickly as possible, and our Marine Guard, which had been to guard the gangways, was ordered to return to their ships. This they proceeded to do the double, and we were since heard that they had to fight their back to the wharf. The wharf was, of course, crowded with people who had not been able to get on board, and it was dreadful to see women standing there imploring to be taken off, even going to their knees and raising their hands in supplication. After we had cast off and we were actually moving away from the wharf, a lady held up a little boy of perhaps 5 or 6 years old and was apparently begging us to take him. I had a rope thrown to the wharf and she made it fast to the boy's shoulders and threw him into the sea, and we hauled him on board, frightened indeed, but otherwise no worse. As we left Odessa, uh, we were the last British ship to leave it, except, of course, the cruiser, which left immediately afterwards. And the unfortunate people who were left on the quay, it was reported by several thousand of them were massacred by the Bolsheviks, deeming the fact that their being there with their baggage was sufficient evidence for their being counter-revolutionaries. Now, of course, this is a totally impartial report of a British officer, and it shows what massacres are, what mass executions of people simply for trying to flee the Bolshevik regime. Now, this is the days immediately following the collapse. But let me say a few words more about the Bolshevik policies to the people of Russia, those that are particularly held suspect in the new regime. And I want to identify three main points. The policy was systematic rooting out of all those who were suspect, not who did anything, but who were suspect of having views that were critical of the Bolshevik regime. Number two, rooting out all those who had any connection whatsoever at any point with political affairs. And here I have a very important example, which is also in my book. Dzerzhinsky, who is the head of the Cheka, who is the secret police, Lenin's political police, as extraordinary commission, he commissioned several officers in his organization to track down and compile lists of all those people who had ever been elected to any office beginning from 1905. Can you imagine this? Anybody who had ever been elected to any office 10 years or 17 years prior to the Bolshevik Revolution, be it the Dumas, the local councils, the Soviets, whatever, if you ever were elected, you were going to be arrested and put in the camp. And that is not speculation. This is proven fact in my book, Behind the Front Lines of the Civil War. This was the way the Bolsheviks were going to treat anybody who had anything to do with political affairs. Just to add to it, in 1929, Stalin made a speech in which he said, "Do we, comrades, have to arrest anybody who had ever crossed their paths with Comrade Trotsky? Of course we don't," he said. But this is exactly how it was done. Anybody who had anything to do with Trotsky was arrested and shipped to the camps shortly after 1929. In other words, this has been a well-established practice that Bolsheviks would root out, and that means really rooting out, physically rooting out anybody who had any experience in politics that was not with the Bolsheviks. Uh, uh, I have data and data in the book further on how many socialists were arrested and cadets, the constitutional democrats, and then they were sent to the Siberian camps and how they suffered there and they were dying and smuggling letters and asking the Western socialists to do something for them with officers. There was not even any camps. They were simply summarily executed if they had anything to do with the whites. And their families were arrested too. It was enough to be a wife of a former officer to be sent to the camps as well. So this was a ruthless vengeance on the Russian educated society and on anybody who had anything to do with politics. And here's the mentality. The mentality is very important. Why were they so thorough, so vengeful, so ruthless in their treatment of Russia, of simple Russian educated society? And the idea is very important because it has some relevance today. Their ideas were that the exploited masses suffered so much under the capitalist exploitation of the ruling classes, the property owners, the capitalists, uh, suffered so much that the ruling classes could never repay their debt. They never, whatever they do, could repay their debt. And therefore, the only way to treat them is to get rid of them slowly or quickly. In case of engineers, the Bolsheviks decided to keep them for a while and keep them as engineers, as technical personnel, with the purpose that they train their own replacement. And when that replacement is ready to take over, then they're going to go to the camps. So this is a very important point. The vengeance of those who were downtrodden over those who had everything was very, very bloody, very bloody. This is the experience of Russia that should never be forgotten. Those who were those who were masters were eliminated. Those who were nothing, who were serfs and slaves, became the rulers, the new masters, and they got rid of their old masters and anybody who had anything to do with that society. So this is a historical message from the Russian Civil War. Thank you very much, and I hope we will resume my new series about the 1920s. So tune in, sign up, subscribe. All the best. Bye.